Rebecca, how are we doing on quorum?
Oh, sorry, I'm checking now. One sec. We're closed, 22, so 3 more people.
I think we have it, 25.
Yeah, we have it now.
Elaine Walsh, now 25.
Okay, let's get started. So welcome everybody to the August Land Use Committee meeting of Community Board 8. Sorry, April, not August. Got my A months mixed up there. So we are going to start with a presentation from George Janes about Planning Together, which is the comprehensive city planning initiative from the City Council. So without further ado, let's turn it over to George and his presentation. And actually, before we do that, one note. So we do have some committee reports after this first part of the meeting. So for folks who are going to want to speak publicly to any of those items in the committee reports, please sign up online the way you would at the full board meeting in the initial registration link for the meeting. Do that before 6:45 if you'd like to speak publicly about one of those other items. But for this item and for the land use portion of this, we'll be doing it like a normal committee meeting. We'll be able to call on members of the public and the board the way we would in committee. So with that, I'll turn it over to George.
Great, thank you, Russell.
Thank you.
Will, can I share my screen?
You certainly can if you give me, no, you can.
Excellent. Can you see my screen?
Yes.
Excellent. Okay, great. All right, so thanks for inviting me again. In March, you heard about planning together. Annie Levers was here talking to you about the new comprehensive plan for New York City that has been proposed. Again, it's a bill, and they are looking for comments. Now, the idea of comprehensive planning, it's common, right? Virtually every jurisdiction in New York State has one. It's unusual that New York City doesn't. I just pulled a few that I worked on, that covers of plans that I've worked on. But there's so many out there, and it's not unusual to be thinking about a comprehensive plan. It's, in fact, I think it's overdue. It is something that it's kind of crazy that New York City doesn't have a comprehensive plan. I mean, New York State has regulations that govern comprehensive plans and how they need to be incorporated into the planning and zoning process. The chief among them is that zoning changes must be consistent with a well-considered plan. And in most jurisdictions, that's the comprehensive plan. Now, we don't do this in New York City. As I was saying, we don't have a comprehensive plan, and our zoning resolution is effectively our de facto comp plan, which is kind of crazy when you think about zoning as an implementation of a comprehensive plan. And because of this absence of a comp plan, it means we evaluate zoning changes on a case-by-case basis, and land use rationale is really justified for specific projects. And you know, it's generally speaking not comprehensive, and really the only time we get comprehensive changes are when we get citywide text amendments. But even then, they're really only looking at small components. Now, I'm going to throw this up on the screen because this is a neighborhood plan, which was really kind of a comprehensive plan in New York City, and I'm sure there are others like 197A plans. I know Sunset Park has a very comprehensive 197A plan. CB6 has a 197A plan, but this is one that I worked on, so I know a lot about it. And so I know that it is possible to do a comprehensive plan in New York City. The East Harlem Neighborhood Plan had a very comprehensive list of topics. It had arts and culture, open space and recreation, schools, daycare, NYCHA, housing preservation, economic development. It goes on. And really, zoning and land use was just a piece of it, which is how comprehensive plans should be. They should, zoning and land use are important, but they're only a piece of the entire picture. And it specifically identified in the district areas for rezonings. It said that the avenues should be upzoned. It said that the mid-block should be downzoned or contextually zoned. It looked at the area comprehensively and set out a land use plan that was district-wide. And what came out of this, so that was given to the Department of City Planning after it was adopted. And the proposal, the draft zoning proposal that came from the Department of City Planning did not match it, but it certainly was consistent. It upzoned the avenues to map MIH. It downzoned the mid-blocks. It preserved even Madison Avenue, which Upper Madison Avenue, which has a very fine-grained historic context. It was, to me, when I looked at it, I was like, wow, they actually listened. And to me, East Harlem Neighborhood Plan proved it's possible to do a community-driven, district-wide land use plan that informs zoning changes in New York City. We've done it. We've done it, and it was community-driven, right? It wasn't top-down. It wasn't something that the mayor's office pushed on the community. So the council's plan it includes a land use plan for each community district like the East Harlem Neighborhood Plan does. But it doesn't use East Harlem Neighborhood Plan or 197.8 planning process as a model, right? It has a completely new model. And it's still incredibly ambitious though. And the details, whenever you do something like this, the details are really, really important. How do you get there? And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to summarize the details. You've heard a lot of this from Andy previously, so I'm not going to spend a lot of time on that, and then get into some thoughts on those details. So So each community district will be assigned these binding growth targets, which are developed by the Long Range Plan Steering Committee. Now, the steering committee will be made up of 13 appointees, 5 from each of the borough presidents, 4 from the speaker or city council, and then 4 from the mayor. These targets, what are these targets that will be given to each community district? Well, there'll be numbers for growth of housing, jobs, open space, resiliency infrastructure, city facilities, school seats, public transportation, and other infrastructure. All right, so it's essentially, they're going to be giving, all right, so community district 8, you're going to have to grow by, or plan for growth for 10% over the next 10 years in housing, or 20% for jobs, or whatever that number is. I have no idea. And they're going to do that for each community district. And they are binding, but community districts may adopt suggested amendments to those targets. But they're suggested. They can't be changed by the community district or the community board. So there will be community engagement about where and how this growth will be accommodated. The community engagement will be led by the Office of Long-Term Planning and Sustainability, which is a part of the mayor's office. It exists right now. The director of the Office of Long-Term Planning and Sustainability will be given an enormous amount of powers in this process. It's at least, I shouldn't say powers, I should say responsibilities. They'll have much more responsibility than they currently have. It's a relatively small office now. It will become a very big office. And so that office will lead community engagement in Community District 8. And it will take that information back and use it for their own purposes in terms of developing the draft land use scenarios. And the community board and your members are one of the stakeholders in this engagement process. You know, there's a lot of responsibility placed on this office. You know, they will coordinate across city agencies, develop the potential land use scenarios, conduct public outreach and engagement. They'll be doing a lot. And so then after the community engagement, the mayor's office again will develop these 3 different land use scenarios to accommodate the growth that the Long Range Plan Steering Committee gives to the community district. The community boards, borough presidents, and the steering committee then recommends one of these 3, or they can recommend their own of the land use scenarios. But they're given no resources to develop such a plan, right? So the easy way is to say, we like this one and point at it, but you have the option of modifying it or developing your own, but there's no responsibility to do that. And city council will have final say on whatever land use scenario that's adopted. So just quickly, in sum, steering committee sets growth targets, mayor's office does community engagement, mayor's office develops the 3 land use plans, and they do this for every community district, so 59 of them. Community boards, borough presidents, the steering committee each make a recommendation on a land use plan. The city council adopts one in the final comprehensive plan. So another detail, which I think is important, is that the adopted land use plan does not have to be followed. And this is a fairly big deal. the applicants for a zoning change have to file a statement of alignment that essentially says, yes, we are following the plan. Here's how. No, we are not following the plan. Here's why. If it files this, it can still go forward. If this were a comprehensive plan under New York state law, you have to do what's called a comp plan review, comp plan consistency review. And if it's not consistent with the comp plan, you're supposed to go change the comp plan first and then go back and change the zoning. And you don't have to do that with the planning together comprehensive plan. And the proposal is going to make rezonings easier if they are consistent with plan. So the city is going to do a generic environmental impact statement on each of the land use plans. So if you have a rezoning that comes in and it is consistent with plan, that relieves the applicant of the responsibility of doing a full EIS. And so therefore, the preparation of a ULURP application is going to be easier, and in some cases, a lot easier. And it would likely be harder to oppose outright because it will be consistent with plan. And if a rezoning is inconsistent with plan, it would still go through ULURP as it does today, right? So you do your statement of alignment, but it still goes through ULURP, and you have to, if it's big enough, it would have to prepare a full EIS because the generic wouldn't cover it. Okay, big unknown to me. So this is what we know, and then there are a bunch of unknowns. And I think a big unknown is how seriously land use plans will be taken, right? So the council member has the final say on these things, and the support of rezonings, will they support rezonings that are not consistent with plan? I don't know. I don't think anybody knows. They can, but will they? Will the council members take the land use plans very seriously or not? And we don't really know. And then, real comprehensive planning, at least the ones that I've been involved in, they're an opportunity for the community to come together on shared values and goals. And to me, the process of comprehensive planning is almost as valuable as the plan itself, because it brings people together to develop these shared values and goals. All right, so if growth targets for your community are instituted from the outside, how does that work, especially if they're inconsistent with community's values and goals? What if you disagree? There is an appeal process. There's absolutely an appeals process, but it's at the end and doesn't involve the steering committee or the mayor's office. It's essentially when you're adopting the land use plan to give to city council, you can make recommendations on changes to the growth targets. Okay, then if the mayor's office is leading the process, interpreting the feedback and developing the land use scenarios, how does that work in practice, right? So I don't know about you all, but I've seen the mayor's office do some community engagement, and the people that do it, they're very skilled, they're very smart, they're very nice, but the problem is that they don't work for the community. And that, if you believe in community-based planning, it's very difficult to have the mayor's office come in, do all of this work, take all that information back, and then synthesize it in a way that will be true to the information that came out. Because those people that are collecting that information, they don't work for the community, they work for the mayor. And so what's going to happen to all of that information? And I'm going to take a couple minutes here just to talk about something that actually impacts CB8. The mayor's office did several mayoral offices, let me put it that way, did extensive community engagement regarding the East Harlem Resiliency Plan, which actually covered down to 92nd Street. CB8 was involved in that. And the plan was never released. It was left in draft form. We had to foil it, and when we foiled it, 90% of it was redacted, and the remaining 10% was essentially a documentation of the community engagement that went forward. It was a kind of thing that was kind of shocking, that you spent all of this time doing community engagement, which people thought was great, but ultimately a lot of the information that was collected from that and the recommendations that came out of that were buried. And they did release a summary report, which had some highlights, but a lot of all the detail was gone. And in that situation, it's that the mayor's office doesn't work for the community. They work for the mayor, and they have different, sometimes conflicting goals. And then another thing is that the community boards can come up with their own scenario if they disagree with the mayor's office, but will those scenarios be taken seriously? And with no resources and no responsibility to independently develop these scenarios, will that happen? And how will that happen, right? It's not like these things will happen by themselves. All right, so could have been different. It really could have been different. So many of the ideas you see in planning together, it didn't come out of whole cloth, right? It came out of other reports and other ideas. One of the reports that was developed in part by the RPA, but with a lot of people that were contributing to it, was this report called Inclusive City. Inclusive City, if you read this and then read Planning Together, you'll see, oh, there's a lot of inclusive city in Planning Together. It calls for an Office of Community Planning, so not the mayor's office, but the Office of Community Planning, and that this office should have technical expertise and resources to support community planning, including 197A efforts, but should also be independent enough to allow the work to be driven by communities. See, the people who wrote this understood the conflict between what the mayor wants to achieve and what the communities want to achieve, and understood that the mayor's office can't be at the center of that. It needs to have some sort of independent body which would provide technical resources to community boards and community-based organizations that are trying to develop their own plans, that they wouldn't be responsible to the mayor's office. Another way, this is my preference, is that the community boards could have been given much more responsibility, especially as it regards the local planning process. Now, Planning Together is about a lot of things, and I'm really focusing on land use at this point. But you know, the community boards are a New York City agency based in each of the 59 community districts that have to develop a land use plan. So why not use community boards, that infrastructure, as a resource to help do that? The community boards could identify stakeholders, develop these locally led community engagement process. Maybe the borough president's office could help out. They helped out enormously in East Harlem, in the East Harlem neighborhood plan, or others. You know, maybe even people from the offices of the council members could help, which also they also helped in the East Harlem neighborhood plan as well. The community board could then develop its own land use plan for the district, which would then be provided to the borough presidents and the mayor's office for their input and recommendation. It's kind of turning this around. Who is responsible for the future of the community district? And then, of course, city council would have to have final say, because they're the legislative body, and that's what gives teeth to a comprehensive planning process, is that the legislative body has to have final say on it. But who develops it could have been, the community board could have had a much bigger role. And, you know, to do that, I also acknowledge that community boards would need a lot more resources. There would probably need to be community reform and how they function. There definitely would have to have more staff, but it's possible. It's possible. We know that because it's been done, right? This plan right here is something that was done just a few years ago, and it was comprehensive, and it was essentially community-led. So again, as I was saying, I'm only focusing on the land use, and the planning together is very, very big, and it's supposed to address all of these issues, and a lot of these issues have very little to do with land use and zoning, right? Like lack of coordination across city agencies, uncoordinated long-term budget and capital infrastructure planning, unrealistic 10-year capital strategy, insufficient capital needs assessment. These things are really important. And I don't know a lot about them, frankly. I mean, I can't really comment on these the way I can comment on the land use stuff, but it sounds really important. And it sounds like something that, even if you had troubles with how the land use component is put together, there are important things in here that could make a much more rational and efficient use of capital budget in New York City. And you may, so if you're thinking about it, consider a recommendation that might be more nuanced, something that says we like certain elements, but not other elements, or how other elements could be improved. All right, so I'm almost done. The next steps, what's going on right now, so that the hearing is closed. It was heard in February, I guess, and it has been closed. But City Council has invited comments from community boards, all of them. And so I suggest that you make them and try to be as specific about your comments as possible. What needs to be improved, how changes you would like to see, what needs to be clarified, and how important these improvements are. Like if you rank order them, or like high priority items to low priority items. City Council has said that they would like these comments as soon as possible. A vote on this is not scheduled, but I was told on Monday that it's expected after the budget is done. So sometime likely in July. So if you got comments in June, they would likely still be heard. And I suggest considering coordinating with like-minded community boards or the borough president's office. I think you amplify each other's voices, and you make if you work together, you will make each other louder. That's all I have. Hopefully that's enough to start a discussion. I would love to hear your thoughts, and hopefully you have a lot of opinions to share.
Thanks. I have some questions, and I see we have some hands up, but I'm going to ask some questions at the outset here. The first question is, what other state regulations regarding comprehensive plans should we be aware of as we're assessing this? Because you mentioned that there was a sort of broadly worded one about the fact that comprehensive plans should be followed, but I was just curious if there's other stuff that you think would be kind of important for us to know as we're working through this.
I mean, that's a fair question. I mean, the overarching one is that you have to have a comprehensive land use plan to make, and so that comprehensive plans essentially need to be consistent with the zoning, right? So if you have what the laws, and again, I'm not the lawyer, but my understanding of what those state laws do is it makes very clear that every community should have a comprehensive plan, and that the comprehensive plan is senior to the zoning, right? So that zoning must be consistent with the comprehensive plan, and if it's not, it should be eventually changed to make it consistent with the comprehensive plan. And if you want to change it inconsistently with the comprehensive plan, you're supposed to go back and change the comprehensive plan first before you do that. It suggests that your comprehensive plan is out of date. There are recommendations in terms of how often they should be updated, and in terms of the processes, there are also recommendations on how they should be put together. I can tell you that the New York Department of State supports comprehensive planning efforts all over New York, right? So a lot of these comprehensive plans get funded by grants from New York State, who they give money to these local jurisdictions and say, do a comprehensive plan or update your comprehensive plan. They get very involved in a very nuts and bolts sort of way in this. And usually especially along the waterfront in certain areas, they really try to encourage rational land use planning. But Russell, I can look into this more for you and get you more specifics.
Okay, that would be helpful. Thank you very much. And then just one
Yep.
follow-up related to that, and then I will go to the public and the board members before I ask my other questions. For other comprehensive plans around the state that you mentioned, are there other situations where there are comprehensive plans that involve subdivisions similar to New York City's community districts or that kind of thing? I mean, what I'm getting at is it seems to me that if you're talking about a comprehensive plan for a village upstate or some other sort of municipality, you know, my guess is that can be done sort of village-wide in the first instance, as opposed to a situation like New York City where you're invariably going to have some degree of sort of like localized districts being part of the plan. And my question is, I guess, just whether there's anything sort of similar to the you know, additional challenge I would think that you have in New York City of having to, you know, have a sort of comprehensive thing applying to the whole municipality, but at the same time, these sort of localized district elements to it. I don't know if that's uncommon or
well, it's not that uncommon. I mean, the city of Kingston is much smaller, but it has like 3 different centers. You know, the roundabout down by the water used to be a different city, and then you go up the hill, and then you have the Midtown, and then you have the Uptown area, and they each have very different characters, and they had different in that comprehensive planning process. They would have different community outreach meetings in the different neighborhoods because they each had different concerns. Now, the point though is that it was still small enough to have one comprehensive plan, right? That had, you know, sections on the different neighborhoods. But, you know, Kingston is smaller than the whole city of Kingston is smaller than all of the New York City community districts, right? It's just the nature of the size of the beast. Yonkers or Buffalo, they may have wards or something like that. But even in that case, I'm not sure that they're done separately. Right? They probably have planning areas or something like that because it's convenient to break these things down into neighborhoods because neighborhoods have different character, but they're usually still developed as one comprehensive plan.
Okay. All right, well, I have other questions, but I'm gonna hold off and let some other folks jump in here. So from the public, Marty Bell has a question.
Thank you, George. I thought that was really an excellent presentation. You made 2 recommendations. One is that the community board make comments, and secondly, to make those comments stronger, perhaps coordinate with other community boards. With respect to the process of making comments and then amplifying them with other community boards, I think you're someone who most people, if not everyone on this call, respects. Do you have comments that you, having reviewed this and know this clearly pretty well, that you think should be made? And secondly, is there available some grid of the comments made by other community boards as a guide? I know the borough president's monthly meeting, I think it's tomorrow morning, that's not enough time, but maybe for the next month, is there some way that people on the community board could see what other community boards are commenting in different areas and sort of a grid as to the comments and line up which they think are right, which are not, et cetera?
So on your second question, I don't know that. And I know that, you know, most community boards or all community boards, you know, essentially when they have an opinion on something, they have to adopt a resolution. And I don't know that any have adopted one yet. Maybe, I don't know.
We can find that out. Yeah,
Okay.
we can
all
find
right.
that out, and I mean, that's a good point, Marty. So we can try and find that out and get that information out to everybody, or try and compile what there is out there.
Listen, on your first-
Maybe suggest that at the meeting tomorrow.
Good idea.
on your first question, Marty, I mean, there are some things that raise red flags to me as a big believer in community-based planning, that the people who live in a community have the biggest stake and vested interest in the community should be the ones that have the biggest voice. That's something that I believe. I know others don't believe that. So one of my concerns with this is the role of the mayor's office in community engagement, and the fact that the mayor's office doesn't work for the community. That's a big deal. Another thing that I know other people have concerns about are these growth targets that are assigned to communities. I have less of a problem with that. I think that there is a role for strategic thinking in New York City that the mayor's office actually appropriately may have. But you're right. There's some right concern about what happens if certain community districts are assigned growth targets that will be difficult to meet because of historic districts or because of zoning that is appropriate. Like if you're given a growth target and you need to increase density by 10%, well, that means your zoning has to change, right? And so, well, what if you don't want to change your zoning? What are you going to do about that? And that means you have to make a choice. That means you have to say, well, we are going to change our zoning. We're either going to spread it out evenly or we're going to pick growth areas. That can be a hard thing to do, especially in certain Manhattan districts that have a lot of historic districts, right? Because that impedes the amount of growth you have. So that's an issue I know a lot of the historic preservationists have concerns over. And those are the two big things for me. And let me say this, is that I don't want to sound so negative, because I really believe that New York City should have a comprehensive plan. There's a lot of good in here. But there are key areas that I think are problematic.
Well, I was just thinking in terms of your comments, your suggestion that the comments be as specific as possible.
Okay.
That's an area where I think you could provide some guidance.
Sure. And that gets into the bill, right? There's a draft text of bill, and so feel free to dig into it. And I'm happy to provide comments for any community board interested in submitting comments.
Okay, so we are, just to give an overview of sort of what the board process is going to be, or has been set out to be before we go forward here. There is a task force that's been set up to look more into the kind of line by line wording of the proposed bill. So that's something that we're going to do. Our meeting is going to be, the first meeting is going to be April 29th. I think it's very possible that it'll require more meetings. So there's definitely a plan to dig into the specific wording and get into that. And yeah, George, if you're available to provide feedback on that kind of stuff, that will be great. So let's go now to questions from the board. So I see Tricia Shimamura.
Hi, George. Thank you so much for this. I thought this was a fantastic overview. I have a couple of questions. So you said that proposals under this plan, sorry, that's my son. You said that proposals under this plan could make new proposals for rezoning easier.
Yeah.
If the rezoning is found to be consistent, I'm sorry, if the proposal is found to be consistent with that, who decides whether it's consistent or not? And what's the process to be found what's the process and under which it would be found consistent or not?
Okay, going from memory here, my understanding is that the applicant files this consistency, it has a name, notice of alignment. That's right, it's notice of alignment. And so they justify whether it is or it isn't consistent with plan. And I believe it's the Department of City Planning or the City Planning Commission that makes the final say whether it is or isn't consistent
Okay, I guess just a feedback from that is just it concerns me that the city planning would figure out whether or not would decide whether or not something was consistent, and then could ease or waive the EIS or the other process without any more community input, particularly as we think about rezonings.
Yeah.
And then
Can I follow up with that? Just you would still need to do a ULURP application. It's whether so it'd still come before the community board, even if it was consistent with plan. It's just the scope of the environmental review, right? Which is a part of the ULURP application.
Right. But having just done the blood center and talking about the issues of the environmental review, that's exactly where we have problems.
Got it.
Okay, so that's helpful to know. And then to the question of I wanted to better understand targeted growth. Where can you go into a little bit more detail? What are they actually giving community boards? Are they giving us what we anticipate is the targeted growth over the next 10 years, or is it what we aspire to be the targeted growth over the next 10 years? I'm confused on what we're actually being given. And what's prescriptive or what's expected, I guess.
Yeah, I mean, it's fair, right? Because it'll essentially be decided by this 13-person committee, the long-term planning steering committee. And it will be based upon this thing called the conditions of the city report, which will outline the conditions of each of the New York City community districts and their needs over the next 10 years, right? And so the idea is that those needs will include growth or no growth, depending on what they need. And so in theory, the idea will be somehow these targets will be related back to data about what the city and what the community districts need. Now, I mean, you're right to say, well, you have a lot of questions about this because, I have a lot of questions about it. I don't know how those growth targets are going to be developed. I mean, there's some words in there, and they're not going to be arbitrary. They're going to be based on information, but we don't really know, right? We don't really know other than high. Essentially, they're going to be focusing in areas where there's a low risk of displacement and high opportunity. So places where, you're not going to displace a lot of people by rezonings who are very poor and have difficult finding new places to live. Things like that. So there are guidelines in there, Tricia, but there's no guarantees on what's going to come out the end of the pipe.
And last question for you, and I apologize if you hear the screaming child in the background. My question about the appeal process. You mentioned that, I mean, it would seem to me that since we don't know what targeted growth really means or what the output is going to be here, that it would make a lot of sense for the community board and other stakeholders to have an access point to appeal right here. Right before we go into scenarios or plans or proposals, it would seem that there should be an access point right here to appeal, but currently there is none. Is that correct?
Right. That's okay. Exactly right. I mean, these targets are binding. The land use scenarios will be based upon those targets. Essentially, after these scenarios are done, you can appeal to city council and say they should have been different. Right? I mean, you would want to have an ability to appeal up front if you think it's wrong, because ultimately, if you think that those growth targets are wrong, then the land use scenarios will be wrong.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so I know that we have wrestled that task force meeting in the next couple of weeks, but I guess my comments then are those 3 points. I'm sorry.
Can we just, I want to keep it to questions, and I should have mentioned this at the start. Okay. That's okay. Yeah, I was about to, but our time with George is limited. So what I think we should do is just, focus on questions that folks have for him so we can make the most of our time with him. And then for comments, we'll have, other meetings and this task force coming up and other things. So I think we'll be able to cover that then. So let's go to Alita next.
Thank you. So I have a few questions about, I have a bunch of questions, but I have two of them relating to the environmental issue. One is, how could the city possibly have a comprehensive EIS given all the various issues relating to the environment and the different impacts of buildings across the city? How long would that take, assuming that you could even do one, which again, I don't know how that could be done, and where does the money come from? And then specifically, could you talk about what the citywide EIS would be like, a vague, as you put it, generic EIS, and how that would relate to the blood center, which since I worked on the scoping documents, there were 19 of the 20 seeker categories that the blood center seemed to raise issues in. So how would those two things mesh? If it could get by, if it meets the generic environmental plans, how do you deal with the specifics of neighborhoods? Because it doesn't seem like that's going to be really relevant unless I'm misreading this.
Okay, on the question of generic EIS and how big is it and how long would it take and how much it would cost, I encourage anybody with an interest in this to actually listen to the hearing on this, or at least the beginning of the hearing on this in front of City Council, because there was a fantastic exchange on this between Marissa Lago, chair of the City Planning Commission, who, you know, they oversee all of these EISs on zonings, right? And Corey Johnson, because Marissa Lago was saying, this is going to cost an enormous amount of money. I forget, I think she was saying hundreds of millions of dollars and take a very long time. Because, it's a very, very ambitious thing to do a generic environmental impact statement for each of the community districts based upon a customized land use plan. And Corey Johnson was like, no, it won't. And she was like, yes, it will. Anyway, and I actually believe Marissa Lago. I think it's going to cost a fortune and take a long time to do, and to do it if you're going to do it right. And I think if we're going to do it, we have to do it right. But that doesn't mean you shouldn't do it, right? Because, again, I point to every other community in New York State. They have a comprehensive plan and they've done an EIS on it. And so, they're smaller, but so what? They've done it too. All right. So, and then regarding the blood center, I don't think anybody would have anticipated putting an R9 equivalent density on a mid block in an R8B district, right? I can't imagine that a land use plan would propose anything like that in any, that's just so out of the bounds of what would be expected. However, if a land use plan did suggest that there would be a R9 commercial equivalent building on that site or in that mid block, it would analyze the impacts for that, from a traffic standpoint, from transit, from schools, whatever, from everything. It may have to do a supplemental to that for shadows that are specific to the building form that's being proposed. So if it had proposed something like that on that site, well then, they wouldn't have to do a full EIS. But it just seems to me, Alita, so unlikely that any land use plan would have considered something like that on that site.
Okay, and then it doesn't seem as though there is any provision for the intangibles that make up our various neighborhoods, such as historic districts, landmarks, arts and culture. So it feels as though the plan is sweeping New York as one giant community. Again, given the little impact and the little input that community boards really have into this, and that everything is top down. Am I misinterpreting this? Because I just don't see that it's allowing, there's enough neighborhood disintegration for various reasons, but it doesn't seem to be given enough credence to the importance of bottom-up planning.
Well, I'm a big believer in community-based planning, right? And if it were done right, all of those, neighborhood-specific, neighborhood-level information that you all have in your brains would be harnessed to make a better land use plan, right? And And my concern, of course, is how it's structured with the mayor's office leading all of that. And are they going to properly capture that information and put it into these plans? And I see a real conflict of interest. And if the mayor's office sees things one way and if the community sees things another way, it's a problem. So I guess what I'm saying is that I think the way it's structured, you're right to be concerned, Alita. But it doesn't have to be that way, right? It could be structured differently to essentially harness your energies to make a better land use plan.
And then also, thank you so much, George, for this really superb presentation. One more, I just want to make sure that my understanding is correct. So the community boards can make recommendations about what they feel are important, but the director or whatever you call the person who's the head of this committee can just reject everything that the community boards suggest. They're not even really sitting at the table because the various, again, top-down constructed components of this planning process take the place of community boards, and the director has the power to reject and implement what he or she wants to do. Is that right?
Well, I think there's an order of operations. So the director of the long-term plan will be in charge of doing all this engagement and developing the scenarios. But then, like the current process now, is that you will make your recommendations, you will say what you want to say, and those will go to city council, right? And so city council has the opportunity to listen to you or not, which is, similar to how it works now. So up front, the director is driving everything, and you're going to be part of this engagement, which is supposed to influence that. But ultimately, when you're making your recommendations on the land use plans, it goes forward, not backward.
Okay, thank you so much, George and Russell.
Thanks. Let's go next to Rita Popper.
Hi, George. I thank you for your wonderful presentation. I have a major concern, and the major concern is that I know how to read a plan, but I don't think I'm capable of deciding what goes where, etc. Has there any thought been to that each community board can work with an urban planner like we do with the Parks Department when we're redoing a park, that we have stakeholders have a voice in it? Could we be the stakeholders telling an urban planner what we want, and then those are the plans that we submit? Because this looks a lot like the tail wagging the dog.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, let me say that I think if community boards were to take the lead on this, they would actually have to have staff, or they would need consultants, or they would need people in an office designed to provide technical assistance, right? Y'all have jobs, or you're not professionals here, right? Is that you're just of the community, and so you would need people who are professional planners and people who do facilitation and in community meetings, who make graphics, all of this stuff, right? I mean, that's all goes into the planning process, and you would need that kind of assistance to be effective.
George, I think that what it is that we have learned, I guess, I hate to say it, trusting the people who are paid by the city to present to the city. I'm talking about outside urban planners that the community board works with, because the prognostication of the future is really on the past. And just to give you an idea of that, we have just recently, and I'm only using this because it's recent, is that a building went up on 94th Street and First Avenue by a developer on a 421A, and you and I both know that at least 80% or 75% has to be for affordable housing. 208 units and 11 are only affordable. And the reason for that is that it gets diffused someplace. So what I'm trying to say is to save time and talk to professionals directly and then have them come back to us where we could see it. And then we see it and then we move the pieces around the board.
Rita, is there,
That's
sorry to
it.
interrupt. Do you have a, okay.
That's it.
Thanks. And just again, I think if we can keep it to questions, I think I would appreciate that. And we'll have plenty of time for comments in other meetings. Anthony, you're next.
Okay. This is like Jeopardy. How can I make my statements form in the form of a question?
Not necessarily, you know.
I'm teasing you, Russell. Okay. But I do have a number of real questions, George.
Go for it.
And thank you. It was actually a wonderful presentation and really sort of started my thinking process about this. And the first, and it is a statement, but I'll, you know, this plan seems to me to be it's a process, it's not a plan, but it doesn't change anything. We still have ULURP, we still have as of right zoning, we still have all of the faults of the zoning resolution. So all the things that are wrong are still wrong. Okay, that was the statement, Russell. But you mentioned that if we adopted the George Janes community boards have more say in this, or in fact, originate these plans. You mentioned the need for community board reform. And what would that mean beyond what you've already mentioned about more staff and money and consultants and everything else? Is there?
You know, it's an open issue that I think would need a lot of discussion on what that would mean. And it might, you know, I have my opinions, but they're just my opinions, right? And you all, I think, might even be, you know, would probably be a better source. Like if you had to be more of an operating agency where you had to do and produce documents, right? How would you need to organize and manage your agency as an operating agency? And your operation would be, you have to produce these plans. And
Great, thank you.
Yeah, you would probably know that better than I.
No, I mean, that's a wonderful, only word is hint. Okay, and then something occurred to me, and this had to do with what you were saying about Kingston.
Yeah.
And I'm right now, this minute in the Catskills, only an hour away from Kingston, so I know Kingston a little bit. Should we have actually more than one comprehensive plan? Should the city of New York really be 5 plans or 10 plans or God forbid 59 plans?
Well, I can tell you my opinion, and it's just my opinion, is that we should have 59 plans. Every community district should have their own comprehensive plan. I think there's a role for the mayor to give strategic direction that these plans, you know, that New York City must be blah, and that, you know, they, you know, give some sort of targets or something like that to make these plans consistent with each other. But the idea that you know, a city that's the size of a large state has a, you know, one comprehensive plan, it's very, very ambitious. And I love the idea of every community district having their own plan, having local land use control. It's very not New York, but
Yeah.
I think it would be great.
Okay, and then in sort of a follow-up to that, the East Harlem Neighborhood Plan, how did they do that? How did they pay for it? Where did they get the?
Well, their council member was speaker, and the council member and the mayor identified it as one of these neighborhoods that was going to get rezoned. So you had the speaker who had gave essentially the effort an enormous amount of money for planning effort in New York City. And then the mayor essentially, by naming it, it gave it real legitimacy that a plan needed to be done. And so the speaker got very interested, and also the borough president's office was very active as well. And they got money to pay for consultants that, in terms of Rita's point, is that outside people came in and helped develop the plan and did community engagement, and they worked for the community. And it was essentially of and by the people. It was great. It was the best planning work I had ever done in my career.
Okay. Yeah, it looked from little snippets we saw, and now I'll have to read it, but looked wonderful. And then one final question, which is, and it is a real question, why does the city of New York have to be more dense? And I have a statement. I'm sorry, a statement to sort of back up the question. The population of
there's a lot of people waiting to ask questions, so just
I know but it's a question. It's a question, Russell. And I just want to say that the city of New York has grown by only 5% in terms of people since 1960. So why is the focus of this process increased density?
This is not a question I can answer, Anthony.
Okay.
I can't answer that question. It is the focus. You're right, but I don't know why.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Russell.
Sure. All right, next is Michelle Birnbaum.
Thank you, Russell. Thank you, George. Good presentation. I am very, very, very concerned about this plan. To me, this is going to be a camel. A camel is like a horse designed by a committee. I mean, there are way too many fingers in this pot. I have a lot of comments and I have a lot of questions. I won't say them now, Russell, because I respect that you want to hold that for a meeting. I do suspect we're going to need many meetings, especially within a short time frame, because it looks as though this thing is going to come to a head somewhere around July. So I hope we can plan for
That's
that.
the goal.
Yeah.
Yes, we will.
And my concern here is
Well,
that
I'm just gonna ask if you have questions for
Yes.
George, go for it.
yes, I watched the whole 7-hour hearing, so I understand that whole back and forth. And the head of city planning made it very clear why she had concerns and made a lot of sense about that. My feeling about this plan is it is an overview attempt to actually manipulate communities. That to me is what this is all about. And that to me is what will be our effort, is to stop that manipulation. I say it's a manipulation
No,
because—
I'm sorry, do you have a question?
Yes. For example, they talk about equity in the plan. We have a lot of historic districts. Other places do, other places don't. When they talk about equity, I understand that equity to mean, for example, we want to make sure that all communities have bike lanes, some kind of infrastructure that's beneficial to everybody. Other than that, and moving populations, can you give me an example about if this entity, this city planning entity, looked at all of the 51 community districts, what would they do? Give me an entity, an equity project that they would seek to do in all 51 districts, aside from infrastructure. I mean, unless they want to move populations. I mean, I understand that we all should have good schools and we all, but give me an example of a project, if you could.
Well, I think my understanding of how equity is used here is that the burdens and benefits of growth are shared equitably. And the idea is, it's in response to the idea that a lot of the communities that have been upzoned in recent years are in communities that are poorer, browner, and the idea is that burden of growth needs to be shared equitably among community districts. I think that's how they use the word. I don't think they use it as like, oh, we're going to have the same projects in every community district, and we're going to do things equitably that way. I think it's going to be responsive to the conditions of the city report. That is the first thing that's done with this, to identify the needs and of each of the community districts and to be responsive to the numbers that are in there. And so I think it's just a different use of the word equity, Michelle.
Well, let me just say, for example, in the Harlem project, they asked for upzoning.
Yes.
They asked for it. So it's possible the community asked for that. At that hearing, since you were at the hearing, there was a lady who was extremely concerned when you talk about equity and population and density. Yeah. There is private home, many private home communities that are one family home zoned. She was very concerned that is that kind of zoning going to be taken away because somebody thinks there should be an apartment building there. And there are many issues like that. So without community input, and not only input from the community board, but
Michelle,
from the
do you have another question?
There. Well, that was my main question. I have 1,000 questions, but I won't mention it tonight. But thanks very much for your presentation.
Pleasure.
All right, next let's go to Peter Patch.
I want a second and third. I think it was a very fine presentation. I'm kind of shocked that it was that good because I think it's very hard to do. My bottom line take is that this tries to create a rational and kind of values-driven process, but the net of it's going to be to create a concentration of power between, city council, head of city council, mayor, office of city of planning, et cetera. I mean, so that it's really, the net is going to be, while it tries to be rational and values-driven, it's going to be more centralized sort of power and influence and less community power and influence. Is that a fair take?
So it depends on your interpretation. It's one of these things that how does it work out at the end? I think, one of the things you have to realize now is that we currently don't have a lot of power in communities.
Agreed.
Right. So is it going to be less in the future? Well, we don't have a lot now. But what I saw this as is an opportunity to try to devolve more power into the local communities. And it certainly doesn't do that, right? Will it make it worse? I don't know. It's already terrible.
Got it. Thank you.
Okay, next is Elaine Walsh.
Thank you, George. Your presentation needs to be in context to what the plan speaks to and then legislation. My questions relate to that this is a totally down approach, not a grassroots. Community planning is grassroots with all the stakeholders. My question is, when you look at the composition of the steering committee, or whatever it will be called, having control, you have the director appointed by the mayor. No term limits. They can resign, but no term limits. You then have each borough president appointing one member. Question is, all the boroughs are of a different size. Why do we not have proportional representation? Second, given the mayor appoints and that chair then, and you've talked to this, responds to the mayor, how independent is this committee? The other piece is, if the community does not like one of the three scenarios, you're given one. Where is the appeal process here? The other piece is that the report itself, I found lacking a total understanding of New York City and the various communities. There were comments in there that I don't know where they got the documentation. Yes, there were footnotes, but they're not. Can you explain, or do you know how the people who wrote the report got appointed to do this? Okay, and the final thing is community boards are advisory.
Yeah.
But at the same time, we're being asked to take on major roles, and I agree with you, unless there is funding. And by the way, the commissioner had said it will be $500 million minimum
Thank you.
to enact the plan. Thank you.
Oh boy, Elaine, there's a lot of questions in there, and I'm not sure I'm the right person to answer a lot of them. I can say a couple of things. Number one, there are two bodies. There's the steering committee, which has these 13 appointees, of which the borough presidents each have one. I think it's a fair question to say, why does Staten Island have the same as Brooklyn? But the mayor appoints 4 of those, and then the speaker appoints the other 4. So there's 13 people. The director, however, is not on that committee. The director is the director of the Office of Long-Term Planning and Sustainability. And that's the person that essentially, they do everything, right? They're the ones that run the community engagement, develop the land use plans, develop the conditions of the city report. That little tiny office is going to be enormous, right? It's going to get hugely bigger, and it will be somebody that reports to the mayor and will not be independent. And I think that's the biggest problem with this, is that they're not independent, reporting directly to the mayor and having a huge role in this process. I think your other questions are, I'm not sure, again, I'm the right person to answer them. If you disagree, let me know.
All right, next is Billy Freeland.
Oh, didn't expect it to be my turn. Thanks. Hi, George. Thank you so much for this great presentation. Let me try to get through my questions and avoid making statements if I can. So one question I have, the state can override New York City zoning, or I guess zoning of any town. And I wonder what implications that has for a comprehensive plan. Does it risk undermining? So the first question is, in the examples you looked at, Tarrytown, Kingston, Armenia, if I'm pronouncing that correctly, has the state overridden comprehensive plans or specific zoning that has any way sort of unspooled the comprehensive plan? Is that a worry that we should have?
Okay, so the state normally only gets involved in these things when they own property and they want to do something like what they're doing around Penn Station, and they did it in Atlantic Yards, and they did it in Brooklyn Bridge Park, where they have an interest. And it's usually on a project by project basis. In other communities in New York State, if you don't have an approved local waterfront revitalization plan, the Department of State can actually override your local zoning, which is kind of a crazy thing, but they can. They don't often do. So I guess typically, Billy, I would say that the New York State inserting themselves into the land use process, other than trying to help people do a good job by giving them money to do comprehensive plans and local waterfront revitalization plans, is very unusual. And it really is focused in New York City on these big projects that have a big interest. Or if there's like some transportation project where the MTA needs to do something and it doesn't want to go through a zoning change for some infrastructure. And there's stuff, nuts and bolts stuff like that happens, or the really big stuff that happens in New York City. I don't think there's a systemic problem.
Mm-hmm. That actually brings me to my next question, which is about infrastructure projects. If they're considering infrastructure as one of the factors to weigh on that list you're showing us, including public transportation, how do you solve for the disconnect that is sort of the state controls the MTA, the city's doing this comprehensive plan, the city's going to decide, okay, we're going to plan for X amount of density increase on the Upper East Side, but requires the state to be an actual partner on making sure we have the subway, for example, the subway access and service that we need. Does this plan contemplate kind of bridging that gap? If I'm making sense, George?
Yeah, no, you make perfect sense. And that's what you need to do in a comprehensive plan. You need to bring all the players to the table, right? And including the MTA and state and your state assembly members and state senators. to deal with, issues that are not necessarily local land use issues. And the connection between transportation, transit, and land use is real, right? And so they need to be at the table. Does this make a special, they have to be at, I wish there was a little bit more discussion in there and how to make that happen. But in a generic comprehensive planning process, well, absolutely, that's part of it. You have to get everybody there. Nobody should be surprised. No transit agency should be surprised at what's coming out the end of the pipe of a land use process.
Great, that's helpful. Just a couple more questions. I want to clarify. So no resources for community boards in the legislation. Did I hear that right?
Yes, but there's legislation and there's budget, and there's usually they're two different things. Legislations give responsibilities, budgets give money, right? So there's no money for anybody in the legislation. That'll come in the budget process. But the thing is that there's really not any responsibility for the community boards either, other than recommending a specific land use plan, one of the three. And so since there's not much responsibility, you can't imagine that there's going to be much in the way of resources.
Got it. Going back to folks having a seat at the table, is there anything in here that contemplates NYCHA specifically getting a seat at the table? When we know that there have been all these discussions around infill and other projects,
Yep.
Is there anything in the legislation that would say make sure public housing tenants have a voice in some shape or form?
I don't believe it is specifically called out in the legislation. I could be wrong about that. I don't think it is, or in the report. But they would be a stakeholder, right? They would be another stakeholder. And if you were doing it right, you absolutely bring in NYCHA, bring in the tenant associations, people who are a part of the community to help develop the plan for the community.
And then my last question, George, would you recommend that we take any position on something like single family zoning, which won't really affect us here, but obviously as a city, is a major issue?
I would leave that as a policy question for your board. I don't have an opinion.
Yeah, okay. Thanks.
All right, next let's go to Felice Farber.
Thanks. This again, I'll just reiterate what everyone else said. This was a great presentation and very helpful and very clear. Just a few questions. How long did it take to do to put together the East Harlem plan? And I apologize if you mentioned that at the beginning.
No, it was in a very quick timeline because it had to be done before the end of the speaker's term. So I'm going to say it took about a year.
So that took about a year, and the city's supposed to do 59 community districts with detailed planning in a fairly short period of time. So that seems unrealistic that you would get any kind of truly thoughtful process, I guess. Does that?
Well, I'm concerned about that. I mean, I'm very concerned about that because it makes a lot of sense to have centralized resources so that you can pull on the expertise of certain people, but there are 59 community districts, right? How much community engagement can you do in 59 separate community districts in this process? It seems to me to be a very high bar.
And I have just two other questions. It seems like this is done in a way to drive zoning and land use planning, and are the long-term plans in the other communities that you mentioned, like Kingston, are they also driven by zoning and land use proposed changes, or is it more kind of a guidance on how to think about what's needed in that community?
Well, okay, let me first say that I'm biased towards zoning and land use because that's what I do. The planning together is about more than that, especially capital budgeting, district needs assessment. There are other things in it. However, there is a lot of land use in it because it is New York City. I would say that it depends on which plan you're looking at, but a lot of them really do get into a comprehensive look at things. So in East Harlem, let me pull up that because that did do very comprehensive. It covered so many different topic areas. And what happened was was that when the rezoning happened, and the points of agreement between the city and the city council and the administration, is that many of the other concerns were essentially funded through the rezoning, meaning the city said, oh, you want this for your parks and that for your schools. And essentially they made commitments to do those things in exchange for the rezoning that happened there. So they were implemented through, these other things were implemented through a land use action, which is common in New York City, maybe less common elsewhere.
And my final question is Plan YC done under the Bloomberg administration a possible model of how you might look comprehensively at a city, you know, drill down in specific areas and set metrics for what goals might be in terms of school seats or resiliency or infrastructure, and integrate it, you know, all the elements through a document like that?
So Plan YC was an amazing effort, produced a lot of materials, a lot of good planning materials. It didn't go through a kind of community engagement process. It was absolutely top down, right? And it was never adopted by city council as official policy. And so it never had the force of a comprehensive plan because the legislative body never adopted it. But still, it was awesome, right? I mean, there's a lot of great information in it. I still go back and look at it for information. It's, I think in terms of structure, thinking, and organization, it was excellent. But, you know, it's missing huge parts in terms of community engagement and local land use planning, right? It's great for what it is, but it's not a comp plan.
Thank you.
Right. Let's go to Sharon Pope Marshall next.
Can you hear me?
Yep.
Okay, great. Thank you so much, George, for that presentation. It was excellent. I wanted to go back to your comment about how you would love to see 59 planning documents. And the reason why I'd like to go back to it, because I actually alluded to that when I asked a question during the city's presentation of the plan to us. I asked whether or not, I asked why they did not elevate the 197A plan. Why didn't they elevate that and provide community board resources so that we could develop a district-wide planning document? I didn't quite understand the answer and didn't follow up on it, but I'd like to ask you that question. If you think it is possible with providing the community boards with resources using the existing infrastructure that we have, the community board infrastructure, do you think, that's my first question, and I have two questions. Do you think it's actually possible that all 59 community boards can indeed produce district-wide planning documents?
So I think your question is great, right? I think the 197A plans, they just haven't been used as much as people thought they would. Every community-based planning effort I have been involved with or I witnessed that got off the ground has been really great. Like the East Harlem plan was really great. The Bushwick plan, which I wasn't involved in, but I knew people who were, and I saw it from afar, was really great. It was a great community-led planning effort. And I think that I have only had positive experiences when people who care enough about where they live get involved, volunteer, and try to insert themselves into the process. Now,
so do you think that given the resources that we could do something like that across the city, all 59 community boards? Do you
I
think that that's doable?
I think that would be doable for the vast majority. I think for some, it might not be, at least initially. But that
Is
shouldn't
that
scare
because
you.
of lack of resources?
Lack of resources, lack of engagement from people in the community. There's a handful that aren't well organized. I'm not ashamed to say that, or at least I have that opinion. Others, you know, the amazing thing about working with community boards is that they're all different. It's astounding how different they each are from each other.
So
and some are better than others.
Okay. My second question is, unless I missed it, but I don't think I found the answer in your presentation.
Yeah.
I still don't know why this is happening and why now. You know, I don't have that sense. You know, and I'm especially why now when over 50% of the council members are not going to be council members, 4 of the 5 borough presidents are not going to be around. So I just, you know, everyone is going to be new. I don't understand why this is happening and why it's happening now. Can you shed some light on that?
I can give you very general opinions. I'm not a political person, right? I don't know the politics of this at all. But I can say that there is, you know, it is kind of crazy. New York City doesn't have a comprehensive planning document, that we do land use decisions on a site-by-site basis. And the way these decisions get made doesn't make any sense to me, and I think to a lot of people who do planning. And so overarching, there's a need. Right? There is a need there, but that need was there 10 years ago, and it was there 20 years ago.
Yes.
And so you're saying, well, why now in the past, you know, several decades? And I don't really have an answer to that, other than the general dissatisfaction with how the mayor's solution to affordable housing is a zoning solution, or at least the zoning solution to affordable housing. You have to identify areas that would be upzoned for mandatory inclusionary housing. And that means you have to pick particular neighborhoods there. And that means that other areas aren't picked, and that there is this sense that there is an inequity with that. And that is the big policy difference, right? That didn't exist 10 years ago. That didn't exist 20 years ago. What we're doing now is we're, you know, I think there's a general dissatisfaction with the way we have to pick neighborhoods that are targeted like that. And I think that may be driving some of it, but you know, again, you're not talking with the political person here, so there may be a ton of other things happening.
Thank you.
All right, next is Elizabeth Rose.
Thank you, Russell. Thank you, George. I feel like we're on the game of Jeopardy. Please make sure your comment is phrased as a question.
Ideally, you would make your question in the form of a question.
So, George, here's one first question. I think we are all concerned about the top-down nature of the targets, and that feels very manipulative to many of us. Have you seen processes in other geographies where this issue of the distribution of the burden and the discussion of what should targets be is discussed across the breadth of communities before they are assigned to more specific or smaller neighborhoods or sections within the larger city? It does feel like this proposal misses the step of you actually need people to buy into the notion that the process and the criteria for defining targets have already taken community input into account in order to create some sense of shared burden and equity across the neighborhood. Is that done anywhere else?
Okay, well, I can tell you the concept of targets being assigned to smaller areas is done somewhere else, but really the question that you're at, I mean, so like London is like that. They use Seattle and Minneapolis as examples in the report, but London may be the best example of assigning targets to boroughs, and then that there's local planning process in place to accommodate that growth. However, I think your question really is more about how are those targets determined and what is the input that the local jurisdiction or the local area has in determining those targets. And that I actually, Elizabeth, I'm sorry, I don't know the answer to. I don't know how in these other jurisdictions they determine the targets that get assigned. Is it based upon regional growth models? Is it based upon aspirations? I honestly, I don't know.
Okay, because I mean, I think for all of us, it is both a point of nervousness and a potential real point of differentiation.
Yes.
Because if there is a, if equity is defined as everybody has the same percentage of affordable housing, that is a very different approach of creating targets than other possible approaches. Don't know what. Okay, so next question. We obviously are all very grateful for the work of the example of the East Harlem Community Plan. Could you please, provide us a narrative of here was what the process was, here is the money that was spent, here were the consultants that were needed, here was the timeline, because I think that's, one of our potential comments could simply be, here is the model, this is what we would like to ensure happens.
I can do that, and let me do that in writing after this.
Yes,
right?
that was what I was asking.
Okay.
Great.
Oh, okay.
Thank you.
Great. Next is Lowell Barton.
Hi, I have a question about with the legislation. Is there an enforcement? We've seen a lot of developers exploit void spaces, dangling cranes, building extra stories to buildings. I was wondering if there would be an enforcement piece for out of control developers. And also in New York City, I was reading a NICOSH report where the fatalities of a construction worker has gone up in New York City, has gone down everywhere in New York State. Most of the minority workers, particularly the Hispanic workforce, and the amount of wage theft and unsafe work sites are huge in developments all over New York City. I was hoping that with this planning, the human factor could be out there, and also some sort of enforcement for the really bad players who race to the bottom and drag us all down.
Right. So this would leave the existing enforcement mechanisms, at least as far as I'm aware, unchanged, right? So DOB has a lot of responsibility there. They have to make certain that buildings are built legally, they're built safely, and they are like the lead enforcement agency for most of what you're saying. And this doesn't change their responsibilities, doesn't increase or decrease them.
Thank you.
All right, next is Craig Lader.
Hey. Hi, good evening, everyone. I have a different sort of take on this. Sorry, I was just trying to put my video on. So I think we all agree about the need for neighborhood-based planning and share concerns about top-down processes proposed in planning together that everyone has already raised and have been discussed at length regarding the disempowerment of community boards that would likely result from this proposal. So I don't really have anything to add on that, but I do want to explore another side of the proposal and make sure that we don't lose sight of the fact that there are laudable goals that are also a core component of planning together. And I don't want this to become an all or nothing proposition where we focus solely on the processes related to community board issues, that we don't try to work to improve other aspects of planning together. Because I think it's a losing battle if the community board role and processes change and we don't comment on the other issues, or just focus on our fears of growth. And it may not be a popular opinion, but as a planner, I can't avoid thinking about growth and equity on a wide scale basis, both within and beyond our community district lines, and recognize that we will and perhaps should bear part of the citywide burden to promote the long-term fortunes of New York City.
I apologize for interrupting. Sorry, do you have a question?
Yeah, it's,
Okay.
I'm coming to it right now. So I raised the same question last month with the representative from the city council staff, but I'm curious as to your take, George, on the need for better coordination on land use and zoning matters and comprehensive planning in general in transition zones, especially when they coincide with community district boundaries, and how planning together may be able to address that. better than it currently does. As an example of how this is handled elsewhere, I used to work for a regional planning agency in Connecticut, where we had what are known as referrals, where projects of significance within close proximity to municipal boundary are reviewed for potential impacts in both jurisdictions. It encourages coordination and better planning in general. So do you have any thoughts on this, as this will be critical as we all think about growth, especially when some of it may be on our doorstep and mandated outside the purview of Community Board 8? And I'm thinking like 96th Street as an example, and
yeah, I mean,
distinctions there.
okay. So a couple of comments is that you are absolutely right that there is an enormous amount in here, and there is an enormous amount that has nothing to do with land use, and it's really good. Like, there's like good stuff in here that I hope that, you know, especially in terms of more efficient government and you know, it's essentially linking land use to all these other things which we as planners are taught to do all the time, right? Connect land use and transportation, and it's something that encourages that, and that's like a great thing to actually put into it's a great thing to actually legislate, right? And so I think there is a lot good in there, and I think you're right to say to focus on some of the positives. In terms of you know, transition zones, you know, one of the things that I know years ago I talked with your community board about is that, you know, the city charter gives you the right to comment on land use actions in other districts, right? You could have commented on the Marx Brothers Playground project, which impacts your community district. It's something that is expected to by the city charter, to at least use what little power you do have to put comments on these other areas, but encouraging, you know, multi-district, multi-jurisdictional actions is always good planning. Craig, you know that, right? Right? You know, because you know,
I ask.
Yeah, I mean, neighborhoods don't stop at this imaginary boundary, right? You know, we experience impacts from over these lines that we draw on a map, right? And I think lines are necessary when we're actually defining these boundaries. But I think, you know, again, the charter anticipates the idea that you have actions on the other side of boundaries that would impact you, and gives you the ability to make comments on them.
All right. We can talk more about this.
I would love to. I'd love to geek out with you, Craig.
Thank you, George.
All right, let's go to Andrew Ravishir from the public.
Hi, thank you very much for allowing me to speak. And I have two very short questions. The first one is, where are the New York City politicians who are coming up with this plan getting their assumptions about growth? Because even before the pandemic, New York City was losing about 2,600 people per day. Between July 2019 and 2020, New York State and New York City actually lost the greatest amount of residents, both by raw numbers of people and by percentage, more than any other state, so much so that we might actually lose 2 congressional seats. Why is the focus on building for growth when really it's clear that we need to build for the people that are here before they flee too, in restoring our infrastructure, converting office space that's going to be empty now into housing that is actually affordable? And my second very quick question is, are any of the people behind this top-down plan wary of creating several Pruitt-Igos? And for those who don't know what Pruitt-Igo was, it was a one-of-its-kind, supposed to be legendary, low-income housing project in the 1950s in St. Louis. And within 25 years, the projects were demolished. It was a total disaster. It broke communities and families apart. It was crime-ridden because it did not take into account local ground-up participation in community factors. And so I'm wondering if any of those considerations regarding population shrinkage and top-down planning are being considered or taken into effect here.
Well, I think regarding your first question, I think it's very fair. You know, it's New York City, and New York City is about, you know, real estate and growth, and you're asking the question of whether it should be, and I think that's a fair question. It is an assumption that there will be growth. It's not that every community district will be assigned growth, but many will. And it's a fair question to ask that question, that will it, is it necessary, especially now during the pandemic? The long-range plan, long-term plan steering committee will be responsible for developing and assigning these growth targets. And it's really unknown what they're going to come up with at this point. But the idea is that there will be growth. Regarding your other question, I think I don't think things would change that much. I mean, we're keeping ULURP, we're keeping city council control over land use actions. Essentially the comprehensive plan would guide future land use changes. It's not going to institute future land use changes. So, I think you're right to be concerned about, or to think about these things, but I don't think that it's ambitious, but it's not that ambitious.
All right, next, Marco Tamayo.
Thank you. I'm going to start asking the question to you, Rosa. In the last meeting, or in the debate, or whatever you want to call, with city planning, Mrs. Lago said, "We don't need a planner. We have a planner. We can borrow the planner for the whole community." If she said that argument that we have a planner, why not in these meetings the planner from city planning should be right here to advise you? This is what Mrs. Lago offered to us, because she opposed the project, and one of the of her position was this Department of City Planning has a planner. So I don't want to put in the hot spot to you, but I think we have to have that person right here, and we had to tell Mrs. Lago that she offered to us. So that is. I don't want to. If you don't want to answer the question, that's fine.
I don't think I understand the question. So you're asking.
The question is,
we didn't have a meeting with Marissa Lago, right?
No.
She testified in the hearing.
No, in the hearing, he said clearly that.
Right. So you're talking about the hearing. Okay. I thought because you mentioned like a community board meeting.
No. They said. She said they are here. The planners are available for the community.
Yeah.
Board.
So I think the answer, if the question is why don't we have a presentation from the Department of City Planning?
No. Why do you have to present the planner right here? Because we need him, and that's the point. That's the bottom line. Because she said the community board doesn't need a planner.
I don't want to get too sidetracked, because I do want to make sure that folks who have more questions for George have some more.
Okay. So now let me go to Mr. Jones. I have to start. Thank you so much for your honesty when you said the comprehensive planning go beyond your knowledge. I think it's a very good first statement, and I like that your honesty, and I think it's great. But the first question is, who established the goals of this strategy of this plan?
Who established the goals of the plan?
Yep.
Well, it's Corey Johnson's bill, and so he's the main sponsor. But it's a lot of the ideas come from different sources. I know that Corey Johnson, Brad Lander, Antonio Reynoso.
I'm sorry to interrupt. I'm saying it's for the plan, not for this for the Corey Johnson plan. I'm saying for the strategic plan. Who established those goals for the strategic plan?
I mean, who sets the targets?
The goals are established for. I mean, I think is the mayor. That's the person, and then every 5 years it will have an assessment if he reach or not, and that is basically the cyclical plan. And the plan, it takes 10 years. The second part is basically that he is liable for if doesn't achieve the goals, and that's where I like this plan, because the mayor has to be responsible if he want to go in different direction with some developers or whatever they want to do it. So he has to demonstrate at the end of the period that he did or not. So the second question, the other question is, yes, I think you know very well, the as of right of development, most of the projects are 80%, and 20% are just only for discretionary actions. So in this case, it's gonna maintain that. And our input will be in both sides. Is that correct or not?
No, well, you would still have as of right development occurring as of right, without any discretionary reviews. However, you would have the ability to develop a land use plan that covered your entire community district, or at least have input in on that by saying what you like and what you don't like. So, you would have some say, but ultimately, I wouldn't expect that you're going to be having much say at all regarding as of right development.
Yes. Finally, I think about the plan of the East Harlem plan.
Yeah.
How do you perceive is doing well in this debate? But before that, let me tell you what happened about me.
Yep.
Most of my clients are in East Harlem.
Yep.
I have 2 or 3 clients that have hundreds of apartments over there.
Yep.
He doesn't want to do nothing.
Yep.
He wants to maintain exactly as is. The only thing he's expecting is when is the right time to cash in the money. So basically, that is what it is, the plan. And I walk constantly that area, and I don't see no difference at all with plan or without no plan. Are you agree with me or disagree with me?
Well, I would say that the plan informed the rezoning, and that there was a significant rezoning in East Harlem, which was informed by that plan. And there has been development in East Harlem that has been according to that rezoning. There hasn't been as much as one might have expected. I think the pandemic had something to do with it. I think that there is some developers are still figuring out MIH, right? Because before it was just as of right development. Now you've got to get to a affordable housing plan with HPD to have MIH in your building, because most of the buildings now, most of the areas now require MIH there that were rezoned, right? So I would say that I would say that it was fairly successful. I mean,
Well,
I think it was fairly successful. I mean, it was ambitious. There were a lot of things that it called for that didn't happen, but something similar, a little less ambitious happened. Like the rezoning area that they called for was much bigger, and it got cut back. But if you look at it versus what's happened, there's a lot of consistency in it, Marco. I encourage you to take a look at it. And yeah, it's like any plan. Some of it was aspirational and didn't happen.
Yeah.
But a lot of it did.
And finally, the last question to you. I'm a co-author of the methodology of planning for small cities. So it's a huge difference between small cities and New York City. New York City is a monster.
Yes.
So you cannot even compare what happened with these 2 cities. Are you agree with me or not?
Well, I would say that you're right. However, land use is land use and zoning is zoning. It just depends on who's making those decisions and at what scale that those decisions are being made. And that's, I think it boils down to, if I had my way, I would have 59 community comprehensive plans, and because of that reason.
Yep. Okay, thank you.
All right. Thanks. I have, we've gone, everyone's had a chance to ask first question. I have a couple questions here. The first one is, did the East Harlem neighborhood plan use growth targets? And if so, what were those based on? And I guess if that should be folded into the sort of written report or written description you're going to do, that's fine also, but that's a question.
Yeah, it did. It absolutely had growth targets, and the growth targets were entirely to mitigate losses of rent stabilized housing. And that there was this decline in rent stabilized housing. And the idea was that growth targets needed to replace that decline. And so, yeah, it was very focused on housing and affordable housing, but there were growth targets which drove everything. And I can get more into that in the writing. Okay.
And then my other question is, I guess specifically in the legislation, is sort of focused on creating more density. I mean, I've seen language that talks about, population growth, sort of where applicable, I guess, meaning where there are targets that population growth has to happen, that it should be prioritized to be done in certain ways. But it seems to me that sort of, again, there's a sort of like, if you're going to have population growth, do it this way. That I don't read those parts of it to be mandating population growth. So my question is just sort of what more broadly in the legislation is there that requires that?
That's a fair question. It depends on what comes out of the growth targets developed by the long-term plan steering committee, right? We don't know what those targets will be, but they've been assigned to develop growth targets. And we don't know if they're going to be 0, or they're 5% or 10%, or how they vary by community district. We do know in terms of guidelines, it's going to be trying to focus growth on areas that are low risk for displacement and that are high opportunities to areas where people could get jobs and commute to. But you're right, Russell. I mean, we don't know what those targets are, and they could be 0.
Gotcha. Okay, Peggy Price, let's go, has not had a chance to ask a question yet.
Thank you. My question relates to the 10-year span of the proposal, which in today's world seems awfully long, given the fast pace of change we see in our city and in our world. As an effect, I mean, what would this mean in terms of someone wanting to do a big plan? For example, when Amazon wanted to move into Queens, that couldn't have been foreseen, say, 7 years earlier than that. It just happened, but it was going to be, if it had been approved, a massive plan that would have made a humongous difference in the community it was targeting. And so I'm wondering to what extent this plan might limit the ability to do such big unforeseen plans. And also the flip side of it is, what if neighbors are concerned about such big plans being proposed for their neighborhood? Could they still have the same kind of voice to, say, object, as happened with Amazon in Queens?
So it's a good question. We call this a comprehensive plan, but it's really not, because it doesn't have to be. So a land use action or a rezoning action doesn't have to be consistent with plan. You could just do the statement of alignment and say it's not an alignment, and we're going to do this anyway because this was an unforeseen opportunity and we need to take advantage of it. It just needs to be disclosed, right? And then it goes through Euler, our land use process that you go through now, the exact same way, where you will get the vote on it, the borough president will get the vote on it, there'll be public comment, public hearing, all of that. So, one of the criticisms could say is, why are we going through this whole land use planning process if we can do that? And that's a fair criticism, but at least it would. This land use process or the planning process has value in and of itself, and will generically guide these decisions to make them less episodic like that.
Thank you.
Okay, next we'll go to Elizabeth Rose.
Thanks, Russell. George, another thing that I think a lot of people are concerned about is, how do you manage to do the entire city kind of all at the same time? Is there a way to stagger the process so that we're not doing the entire city at the same time, but we're doing a portion of the city at once, and then we do a different portion of the city and a different portion of the city? What are the what's the potential? Yeah.
I think that's a great idea. I think I can tell you that the bar that's been set is very high, right? Is that doing all of this work for all the community districts all at the same time? Man, that's going to be a bear. And I think maybe if you believe that, if you agree that may be one of your comments, right? Is that you segment this into pieces. Now, it's not typically how you want to do a comprehensive plan because you want your comprehensive plan to be comprehensive. But if you had a way to break it up into pieces to make it easier to develop and implement, I think that that's a fair comment.
Okay, Alita.
Thank you. I could be wrong about this. So listening to everyone's comments, I'm starting to get really, I mean, I've been concerned about this and I'm wondering, am I crazy to think that there is a possibility of influence over the way that this plan looks? That if we have a mayor who is, let's say, subject to heavy lobbying or influence by REBNY or other individuals, that could have a long-term impact over the 10 years that this plan is, that each iteration of the plan could be in effect. Community groups are not subject to the same kinds of influence, which is yet, for me, another reason to want to have community groups have a greater influence. But am I wrong about the potential of lobbying or influences that could alter the course of the city and the way it looks and functions for years?
Yeah, I mean, it's a fair concern, I guess. I mean, what will drive the plan will be the growth targets, right? That's everything. Right? That's, well, not everything, but it's a big driver of this, right? If you're assigned a 0% growth target, your plan is going to look very different than if you're assigned a 20% growth target. And how that target is developed, Alita, it's not clear.
It's also something that I know that you know this, George, because we work together on this, which is that a lot of developers say taller buildings are necessary to bring in affordable housing or to diversify neighborhoods. And yet all we've seen on the Upper East Side is the loss of 14,000 affordable units whose numbers are only going to grow because they're already warehousing and buying these small tenement buildings. And from what I understand, putting up buildings with multiple floors for single units rather than even full, even multiple units on single floors. So I guess that's my concern. And do you have any way to protect against the forces pushing for growth in the name of some things that, yes, if they were to work would be beneficial, but with heavy lobbying, especially when there are elections that could have that timing aspect?
Lita, I don't even want to speculate. I'm not the political person, right? I don't know lobbyists. I don't know how that stuff happens, right? I would like to think that this comprehensive planning proposal and the people that would serve on the long-term plan steering committee have the best interests of New York City at heart, right? And this is about how to serve that best interest. I know stuff happens. I'm just the wrong person to ask about that.
No, I was wondering if there are things that we need to think about that could be built into the plan without being political. But I think the word I was looking for before was cynical. I'm just getting more and more cynical. But thank you so much, George and Russell.
All right, Wendy McIver.
Hi, can y'all hear me?
Yes.
Oh, great, thank you. Mr. James, it's another magnificent presentation, and I appreciate every time that you have spoken before CB8. I'm merely a member of the public, and I'm going to ask a question about environmental data, but I wanted to say I was raised on the romance of Haussmann in Paris, creating these beautiful boulevards in a well-organized city, with height limits and a sort of uniform look to the city, like a wedding cake, and it's still magnificent. It's a beautiful city. And so when we think of comprehensive city planning, I think many of us have the dream that there will be some kind of plan of that nature. It will be very beautiful, which also would be chilling in terms of creativity and development and also preservation of communities. So I wanted to also say that when I was in law school, I had a professor, Manassi Haile. Everybody should look him up. And he spoke about the necessity of bureaucracy. And I know, Craig, you spoke about everybody wanting to simplify, and I want to say that we were taught that bureaucracy is actually the thing that slows down a corrupt process. And to Alita's point, we are worried about undue influence, especially for people who have a lot of resources that us common folk who just sit here and pay taxes do not have. But I've spent several years coming before CB8 and talking about environmental aspects of building and the profound effects of building above 210 to air quality and to climate change pollution. And those pesky molecules don't know to keep their place wherever they're produced. They spread all over the city. They raise the rise of the Atlantic Ocean, and they cause a lot of damage and a lot more expense for us. And I don't see that kind of analysis is ever going to be included in environmental impact statements, nor is there any mechanism for giving funding to community boards so that they can conduct their own independent environmental impact statement that would create additional denominator data, relevant denominator data. And I'm wondering if you see that. Am I missing something when I read the proposal? Thank you.
I don't see this as being a radical change of our environmental review process, or even really our land use process. We start with what we have, and the plans will build upon what we have. It's not going to be, I think it's very unlikely the plan would radically transform what we have into, a vision of Paris or something like that, right? It's about where change would be guided as opposed to really transformational change, or at least that's how I'm seeing this. And I don't see any change in the environmental review process other than the mother of all generic environmental impact statements, which would have to be done to implement the plan.
All right, well, we are at, we've had you here for 2 hours, so, which is, we very much appreciate. Yeah, well, it's flown by.
Yeah.
First of all, I just want to say thank you for all the time you've spent with us here, and for your excellent presentation. As others pointed out, it was very, very informative and very helpful, and your answers were very helpful. So thank you very much.
It was my pleasure, and thank you all for caring enough about this community to come out and spend your evening this way. It's fantastic.
And we may, we'll have probably some questions maybe that we send you in writing at some point and that kind of thing. And so if you're open to answering some of those, that would be very much appreciated also.
Absolutely fine. And I will get back to you regarding the East Harlem summary information Elizabeth asked for.
All right. Thank you very much.
Okay, super. All right. Thanks, everyone.
All right. We will now move on to the second part of the agenda, which is committee reports. And so the first one that we are going to hear is the Parks and Waterfront Committee. So I will turn it over to Tricia and Barry.
And good evening, all. Tricia, you want to pick up on this, please?
Sure. Hi, everybody. We had one item on the agenda, one resolution that we passed. It was unanimous. Just very briefly, we were discussing access to water on Alice Aycock Pavilion as phase 2B continues right over there. There were a lot of comments about the state of the lawn on Alice Aycock Pavilion. If you are not regularly over there, let me just tell you, it's a mess. The lawn is torn up. It is not really a lawn as much as it is a dirt patch. We desperately need water access on there. And every time it rains, I kind of get excited because I know at least it'll turn green. But without regular access to water, we're just going to be looking at another dirt patch over there. And it's such a beautiful space. We desperately need regular access to water. As it turns out, there is some water infrastructure there. It's just that apparently they never thought to finish the job when it came to ensuring that we had a way to take care of the space. And so as 2B gets continues, the resolution is calling for the kind of final steps to take place so that we can actually get water to this patch of vital open space and keep it green. So with that, I'm happy to take any questions, but you can read more about it in the summary, and the resolution that we passed was unanimous.
Lita?
Thank you. Is there a way to, if you're bringing in water, to do something with rainwater or something that's more, not to pun, but green?
Well, right now the water hookup is all there. All the piping is there. When the folks finished 2A, the Alice Aycock Pavilion, they neglected to connect the parts between the pipe that exists underneath that building and the connection at Alice Haycock. They have agreed to turn it on, or to
Okay.
make the connection and turn it on.
Okay, thank you. I just can't help thinking about the environment these days. Thanks.
Thank you. Ed Tarchlog,
I was going to call the question.
is there a second? Michelle, that says a second. Thank you, Michelle. All in favor of calling the question? All opposed to calling the question? I assume, Alita, your hand's up. You're not opposing, are you? No. Okay, good. Will you take care of the roll? Who's doing the roll?
I got it. If you'd like to vote no, abstain, or not vote for cause, please raise your hand. Elizabeth?
Elizabeth, unmute.
Abstain.
This was to help them.
Okay, seeing no others, I'll calculate that for you guys quickly.
Thank you very much, Rebecca. And thank you, Russell.
Thank you.
Thank you, guys. Okay, next is the Social Justice Committee. So let's hear from Sarah and Sandrea.
Hi, everybody. Okay, so at the last Social Justice Committee meeting, Sandrea and I met on the police reform proposal. So as many of you know, the governor last year announced that if municipalities were going to receive state funding moving forward, that they needed to come up with a community-based plan to reform for police reform. And in early to mid-March, the City of New York released 2 reports on called New York City Police Reform and Reinvention Collaborative Draft Plan, parts 1 and 2. One reflected the feedback they got from communities. The second reflected what the city agencies thought that they would do in response to the feedback that they received. And so we had a discussion about the recommendations of those reports. So in your minutes, you'll see links to both reports as well as to the Google Doc presentation or Google Slides that we used during our meeting that summarize the recommendations. And then we proceeded to have a discussion with the community board members as well as our community members who joined us, and everyone had an opportunity to make their suggestions, and we had a robust discussion and heard many different perspectives about what people felt was really important moving forward. So, so I will hand it over to Sandrea now to discuss the resolution.
Yes, greetings all. Yes, our resolution was passed by those who attended. It was 12 members of the board, and our public member also voted on that. So I'm just going to read our resolve. CB8 believes that reforming the NYPD would require structural changes that will necessitate rebuilding policing from the ground up. We need to reimagine what public safety means, how city resources are activated to protect all New Yorkers, and how to ensure democratic oversight of our police force. CB8 urges the incoming mayor will appoint a new police commissioner that will commit to reimagining policing in New York City from the ground up. And CB8 calls on the city to prioritize the following suggested reforms. The reforms are listed in the resolution. You all can go over it. I'm sure many of you have viewed it already. And yeah. So
Sure.
yeah. Mhm. Looks like we have a question. or two.
Sure.
So I can call on people. Is that okay?
Yeah, Michelle, you can unmute.
Okay. So there's a long list of suggestions here for reform. For those of you, I don't know if you've printed it or you've seen it or you have it in front of you. There are many, many, many parts, and there are subdivisions under each of those parts. While the bulk of them, to my mind, are very good suggestions, there are some that are that for me would be something that I could not support. Firstly, in one of the resolves that that the structural changes would necessitate rebuilding policing from the ground up, that's not a concept that I support. But going to the meat of what's in the outline, they're talking about, number one, that the police commissioner would not have authority over the review board decisions, and I find that difficult. But to me, and there are a couple of others, but the one of most concern to me, and I think will end up in a long run hurting the community and hurting the public, even though I know it's popular to be against to end the qualified immunity for police. But let me just speak to that for a minute. Not every action that a policeman takes is an aggressive one. There are accidents, there are missteps, there are all kinds of things. If you are a member of any board of directors, you usually have director's insurance. And that's even for making benign decisions, like if you're a member of your board of your building. Whenever you are covered with that kind of insurance, fraud, intentional acts, that you're not covered by that insurance for that. It's only for actions that are done in goodwill, but there are errors or misjudgments, or in the case of a board, you don't fulfill your fiduciary responsibilities, something like that. If you embezzle the building, and this goes for a company too, if you're embezzling or if you're doing anything criminal of any kind, your insurance doesn't cover you. Now, to my mind, to take this away from a police officer, which covers him in the daily routine of doing his job, will likely, or let me say could, but I think will likely result, number one, in less policemen, and less people applying to be policemen, and in more hesitancy in the job, because it puts an officer at risk for losing everything that all his personal finances, his home, the ability to support his family, his savings, his pension. It absolutely wipes him out. And there are situations where, as I say, mistakes happen, accidents happen. And as I say again, it does not make him immune if he commits any fraud or act of aggression or anything criminal. So to my mind, while there are a lot of, decent things in here, but that and a couple of other things would prevent me from supporting this resolution.
So if I could
Okay.
clarify a little bit with qualified immunity, that it actually prevents lawsuits from even being raised because a similar lawsuit hasn't been, or a similar infraction hasn't been raised in the past. And so it's a serious limitation on civil litigation in terms of actions that do violate policy, that these actions can violate policy, but they're prohibited from being heard in court because that specific action hasn't been heard.
Can I jump in also? Is that okay? Is she finished? Sarah, you finished, right?
Yes.
Okay. Yeah, so qualified immunity, that's a civil rights law. And the fact that, and it's there, and it has been there for police officers, for elected officials, for correction officers. It prevents them, it shields them from, when they are bad actors, from being sued, for having any liability. And what happens is the taxpayers always pay for the wrongdoings of people. You call it accidents, that's fine. Everything is not an accident, to be clear. One of the things with the commissioner that we spoke of, the CCRB, they hold independent investigations. One of the problems with them having no strength and no real input, they make suggestions, but then if in fact the commissioner can just override that, we would like to see them have more strength and more say-so in what happens and what they recommend. What's the use of them doing a investigation without having any say-so or any power? So I believe the community and everyone would benefit from the CCRB having more power and their recommendations be adhered to. They're in place and they've been in place for well over a decade. That's just what I wanted to say. So let me go to Ed. Oh no, sorry, Jane.
Thank you. I'm going to have to vote against the resolution myself. It's just too filled with broad-based generalities. And, you know, we all bring our own personal experiences to the table in any of these very sensitive areas. But I honestly, maybe I'm in the total minority here, but my hat is off to the police department. When I look at having to make domestic violence calls, having to police these large gatherings, having to just be here in the city of New York. And I just don't understand this resolution. I think it's just way too broad-based, and I will vote against it. Thank you.
Thank you. Ed?
Hi, Sandra. Thank you. My apologies for not reading the resolution more thoroughly before I'm speaking. In fact, I'm looking over it. So if I'm not looking at you, it's because I'm looking at the resolution. I don't mind the idea of, you know, rethinking policing. I'm on board. And full disclosure, you know, I clerked in the U.S. Attorney's Office in the criminal and civil division in law school, and was planning to join the DA's office when I got out. You know, my focus would have been more, especially a place like New York City, excuse me, in terms of just, as I look through this, one of the things that caught my attention, I'm with you in terms of poverty should not be criminalized. Absolutely. It's a Class A felony to be poor in America. No question about it. And that has nothing to do with the cops. That's a different animal. But the thing, I think, I'm not going to vote against this. I'll probably abstain, not because I'm not for the idea, but some of this does seem to be micromanaging. Like, for instance, just catching my attention, and again, apologies for not reading all of it as I kind of scroll through. I'm with you wholeheartedly. End abuse of overtime. That's more Scott Stringer, the next comptroller's job, is to keep an eyeball on that overtime. And I guess what caught my eye the most is under number B, increased focus on white collar crime. Well, yeah, I'm with you on that. I mean, white collar crime, no question about it. No one went to jail in the financial crisis. But frankly, okay, my biggest concern in New York City, and I will take a chapter from Michael Chertoff and Rudy Giuliani and all the others, is it's organized crime. I would like to see more unorganized crime. I mean, you know, if you want to talk about costs into this city and to the taxpayers and criminal prosecution, let's talk about, you know, and you hear it all the time from people at the federal level. It is the, you know, increased cost for people to pour concrete in this city to build. I'd like to see us root that out. I mean, that is a tax on every single person in New York City. So if we're going to start asking the police department to prioritize criminal behavior, I would like to see them focus on that, so that if you're pouring a yard of concrete in New York, it's not, I've heard this, $42 and it's not $16 in Jersey. Okay. The cost of sand and gravel does not go up that much across the river. So I would like to see a little more focus on that, because it affects all of our pocketbooks. But I'm not against this idea, but I will abstain just for that reason, only because some of it's a little broad. I haven't seen all of it. I'm not against it, but I haven't consumed all of it. Some of it does seem, to Jane's point, but I like the general idea. I don't know if I'm on board for all of it. I think some could be pick and choose here, but I don't want to micromanage now. And I'm sorry I didn't make the meeting. It was a little caught up this past week, but I just wanted to say that as to why I'm abstaining, because I don't want you to think that I'm against the idea. It's just a couple of it I'm not for, and I don't want to take up more time. We've already been here a long time, but I just kind of wanted to say that. That's all. I'm not, like I said, I'm not against it. I'm not for all of it, but I don't want to vote against it. That's all.
Okay. Okay. Thank you. And it's not about us, Michael. It's not about micromanaging at all. They are asking for suggestions from the community, because at the end of the day, it is us that pay taxpayers. As many know, I'm a former member of the NYPD supervised payroll. So I'm not a fly on the wall. I've seen a whole lot, but that's not for this discussion. Thank you. Rebecca? Yeah.
I'm already unmuted. Sorry, my headphones just died. Thank you for all of technology and policy, which is 6. I think it does, it covers a lot of ground, but I see that you also have you're going to hold a future meeting on police technology. And I think quite a bit of that is a state issue as well. I'd love to see you guys explore reverse search warrant bans and stuff of that nature, which again is legislated from the state.
Okay.
Thanks.
Thank you. Sharon Hope, please.
Hi, hi everybody. First, thank you to Sandrea and Sarah. I cannot believe the depth and extent of this document, and it really, the resolution, and it really attempts to address a lot of issues. And I appreciate this opportunity to join the 11 board members who supported this, as well as the public member, 12 people who supported this at the committee level. I would ask that the board not abstain, but also support this committee's resolution as well. I also understand the sensitivity of this. It's been a phenomenally difficult year, for all of us, and what we've witnessed and what we've experienced and what we've seen is unlike anything that even our parents might have gone through. And so to tackle this at this time, given the continued sensitivity, I think that the committee, the 12 board members, you deserve kudos for attempting to tackle this. So I will sum up and just say that I'm going to support this, and I appreciate Sandrea and Sarah and everyone else who was involved in putting this together. It represents a start. It doesn't represent an end. It just represents a start. And with that, it just means that it serves as a basis for additional conversation going forward. Some things will be implemented, some things will not. But what we have is a solid foundation for moving forward.
Thank you. May
Hi,
Mallett?
can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Hi, thank you so much, Sandrea, and thank you, Sarah. I wasn't really sure what to say, but I think I'm just going to speak from the heart here. First of all, this is a proposal. This is in many ways a value statement. I'd like to believe that our values would consider more the safety and dignity of the Black lives that live in our council district than consider the discomfort, our own discomfort, or the discomfort of our fellow members. Another thing I want to say is that as I hear these conversations take place around the subject of race within the context of interactions with law enforcement, the language that is used by some members is highly problematic. I'm going to believe that we are all well-intended, but I would urge the Social Justice Committee and other folks on this board and Russell to consider adequate training for all of us so that when we're talking about sensitive issues like this, especially when it's an issue that truly only a handful of us have any actual damn experience, know what it's like to be a BIPOC, a Black person, an Indigenous person, a person of color, what that means when you're interacting with law enforcement. It's really hard to encourage conversation when so few people look like me and Sandrea, and so many of you seem to be opposed and more concerned about the comfort of our officers. So I'm just speaking from the heart here. I'm both hopeful and discouraged. I'm in full support of this resolution. Frankly, it could go even further, but I understand that it's going to take some baby steps. Thank you so much, Sarah, and thank you especially to Sandrea.
Thank you. Anthony?
All right. I think reading now sort of a couple of times the resolution, I would say I wish it had been 2 or 3 resolutions, each one dealing with a more with a portion of the topics that that you cover, and I think it is a little bit of a truism, and at least for some of us in the city, that the police department is overfunded and over-weaponized, and is more powerful an organization in the city than they should be. I'm going to vote for this, although I have reservations about little bits and pieces, and because I think the general thrust of it is right. I think that criticism from the community, and especially a community such as ours, which is diverse, as Ed Hartzog pointed out to me 3 years ago, some of the wealthiest people and the wealthiest people in the city and some of the least wealthy people in the city live here. And so I think that it's important that we make appropriate statements about how we feel about the administration of our city. And that's it.
Thank you. Barbara?
Just want to say, I think the two of you did an amazing job. I tuned in for a short time and then I had to go someplace else. And this is amazing. I also want to say, May, that you brought tears to my eyes. I spent today with my friend who is Black and lives in Harlem, and she talked very openly about some of it. And it's very difficult for me to hear anyway, and so on. There were, at first I said, well, I'm going to abstain because there was 1 or 2 things I was uncomfortable. It's such an amazing list that you have. I'm going to vote for it. And I want to say thank you. And I do think more general discussion about some of the things can be very useful and important, and maybe we will change. Maybe, right, Sandrea?
Yeah, thank you. Billy?
Thank you, Sandrea and Sarah, for your really hard work on this. Thank you, May, for sharing such a personal and I think really important feeling. We are 1 year and in less than a month removed from the murder of Breonna Taylor. In 1 month, May 25th, we'll have the 1-year anniversary of the murder of George Floyd. We are hearing from a social justice committee that was born out of righteous outrage about police brutality in this country and discrimination that goes far beyond criminal justice system. I would first ask those who have questions about this resolution or doubts, please attend meetings of the Social Justice Committee. Took a while. We fought hard. Folks fought hard. Andrea, Sarah, others to make sure we have such a committee on this community board. And I hope we treat it with the importance of committees like zoning and landmarks and others, and recognize that there are members of that committee who have put in a lot of hard work into framing a resolution on a really, really important topic. They've been studying this issue, and I think we should, give them some deference here. I'm going to vote for this, absolutely, and I hope others will too, even if you have a quibble maybe with a line or two there. We are not, as a community board, revamping city policy. We're not revamping, NYPD rules of engagement. We are offering our thoughts on a structural reform and a series of reforms that we want to see. And I hope folks will realize that while we may have some disagreements over certain parts of this, I personally don't. I support every line of it. That there's a larger message I think we should be sending as a community board, voting, if not unanimously, then near unanimously in support of a message that I think finally reckons with something that we've been trying to deal with as a board for more than a year. So I'll leave it there. I'll leave it to others to kind of debate the ins and outs of it. But I really think it is important that we leave a strong statement as a community, given that, look, this is a community that is overwhelmingly white and it's not entirely well off. But frankly, we have a lot of privilege in this community that shields us from the realities of police brutality in our city and in our country. And I hope we'll show some solidarity and allyship with those who have been affected for not just years or generations or decades, but for 400 plus years in this country, with what over policing has done. So I'll leave it there, and I'll thank Andrea and Sarah again.
Thank you, Billy. Tricia, please.
Yeah, I just wanted to kind of echo what many others have said at this point, but I thank you both for your leadership on this. I thank you for the thoughtfulness that you put into this extremely robust list of reforms and actions. The whole thing kind of reminds me of a conversation that I had with the borough president years ago when I said to her something about the community board playing too much of a reactionary role. And she shot back at me saying that it's not just the community boards should not be reactionary alone. They should be looking forward and they should be finding ways to move forward. And this very much feels that way. Yes, this committee was born out of a time of incredible concern of the social injustices that we're facing right now. But I think that your list and your kind of this resolution really focuses on what's ahead. And I hope that in future meetings that and maybe future resolutions, we unpack all of this, because I think it all could be dealt with individually. To others' points, I think that it could be more detail could be added. I'm very proud to support this, and thank you for having us kind of set our sights forward.
Thank you. Russell?
Thanks. I guess I just want to briefly address some of the points that were made and some of the concerns that there were. I guess on the topic, this is in no particular order, but in the topic of white collar crime, I think I think that's an issue where it just often feels like it's not even on the radar for the police, and it's such a critical issue. And I think that's why it was appropriate for us to ask that it be prioritized. And I think that's just sort of an example of the way in which, police, I think sort of current police priorities kind of can exacerbate existing inequalities, and sort of perceptions of what the priority should be or what the real problems are, leads to a lot of the problems that we're seeing. And I think, focusing on something like white collar crime, which is a huge, huge problem and just doesn't get any NYPD attention, that's sort of an example of a change that I think would be really needed. I think in terms of I think Sarah addressed the point about qualified immunity. I mean, just the fact that, basically the officers are going to be indemnified regardless, to sort of use the example of a board. The question is just whether the suit gets to proceed at all. On just, the other, I guess, last point I'll address specifically, and then I'll talk about something else. I don't think that this is sort of overly micromanaging. I think this is really consistent with the kind of guidance that we would give to other agencies. It happens that there's a lot of points that are made here, and more than perhaps you would have in other resolutions, but it's because it's a very broad issue. But I think in terms of the nature of the feedback that we're giving to the city, and this is talking about both the mayor and the NYPD and also the council, I think it's appropriate. I think it's consistent. And then I did want to just address what May had said. I think, one of the benefits of having a social justice committee is to be able to have dialogue, and, frankly, it's an opportunity for discussions in which I think people can learn about issues and learn about things that they may not have been familiar with and may not have known about. And I think that's really one of the benefits of the committee. And in terms of sort of more specific concerns, I'll just follow up with you about that.
Thank you. Vanessa?
Hi, thanks. I wasn't going to speak on this because I try not to add non-substantively different content to anyone else, but I really felt compelled to add my voice and use the voice that I have to support the Social Justice Committee under your leadership, Sandrea, and Sarah's leadership, and just share that I'm really support this resolution. And I appreciate those, including May, who have spoken up tonight to share their experiences. Frankly, I think some of the comments that were made tonight highlight why it is really important that we come together as a board and align our voices and values around this resolution. So that's all I wanted to do is join in and use the voice that I was given to share my support.
Thank you. Barbara?
Barbara Chalky, please unmute.
I am. Okay. I support this enthusiastically. And I have to say, which I think was the previous comment, I'm almost embarrassed by I am embarrassed by some of the comments. This should pass unanimously, or at least close to it. Haven't been people watching the news and listening to what's happening in the city and in the country. So I urge people to really think about it. And I really do think people should sit in as many of these committees as they can, the Justice Committee, because I think people here need to hear what's really going on. And I thank them for bringing it to us. So please, people, think about how you're going to vote on this. Thank you.
Thank you. Alita?
Thank you. I just wanted to say that I support this because it is important to send a message to the city to think about a lot of the issues that have come up recently and over the years, that no one and no organization is perfect. And what we're saying is these are issues that we believe, or these are standards that we believe have been accepted, but should be looked at and examined and changed. It's not necessarily a blueprint because we're only advisory, but it's important to send a message given the context of our community, which does a lot of good for people, but we want to represent all of our voices and all of the voices of the people in the community. So I support this, and I urge you to think about the big picture and the message that we as a community board representing everyone in our district and looking to improve the quality of life and looking to improve the way things are done in all areas of city life, could think about things moving into the future. Thank you, Sandrea. Thank you, Sarah.
Thank you. We're going to go to caller and user 2. I don't know who that is.
I believe that's Mrs. Brown. It's
Okay.
*6 to unmute.
Hello. Yes. Good evening. I am traveling, so if you hear a lot of noise in the background, I apologize. Firstly, I'd like to congratulate Ms. Coleman and Mrs. Chu for their hard work. I support this document. I want to thank them for considering my recommendations and my comments at their last meeting. This is just the beginning. And all I ask is that all community board members do a self-audit. And when your children or your grandchildren, your great-grandchildren ask you if you're a part of the solution, you can answer them honestly. This has been going on, Sharon, during my generation and before my generation for 400 years. It hasn't changed. It's just because of social media, everyone has an opportunity to see it live. So this is an opportunity for all of us to make a difference. And again, Andrea and Sarah, thank you for your hard work. I support this document, this resolution, and I will vote for it. Thank you very much, everyone.
Thank
you, Mrs. Brown. Before you mute yourself again, you were present for the last vote, right?
Yes.
Okay, I thought so. We just wanted to make sure the record was correct. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Chuck, please.
Chuck Warren.
Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Yeah. I want to thank the committee and Sarah and Sandrea, and I think this is a very important resolution, and I strongly support it. I don't think anyone can really look at what's happening today and what's been happening for a number of years and show that there's a very serious problem in the way the police interface with minority communities. And I think this resolution, sends a message in general, and I think they asked for specific recommendations, and there are some good specific recommendations. So again, I would urge the board to strongly support this. Thank you.
Thank you. Wendy, a public member.
Thank you so much. And thank you, Sandrea and Sarah, for all the hard work you put in. I wanted to address the points that Michelle brought up and that Jane was seconding about qualified immunity and with the commissioner having a say over the review board. It's important that external stakeholders have a role in evaluating the behavior of officers. In a sense, we are their board of directors. Ultimately, we're the taxpayers, we're the community. And I also wanted to say that I don't think that you meant this to be insulting to officers, but to say that they can't withstand scrutiny and that their examination can't be examined in a rigorous way is kind of insulting to the wonderful officers who do serve as public servants for their entire lives, but they put themselves at risks, that their behavior cannot stand up to that kind of examination. I find that incredibly insulting to them. I don't think you meant it that way. I'm hoping that this will help you to see your way clear to voting for this proposal. This is something that actually helps good officers to perform policing and peacekeeping duties. It's something that frees them from having to feel loyal to people who would undermine and perform heinous acts. I really hope that you will rethink what this proposal means because, a rising moral tide lifts all boats. So thank you.
Thank you. Lori?
Hi, thank you. I'm not going to belabor the point. Thank you very much, Sarah and Sandrea, for doing the very hard work on this. And I just want members to think about the headlines. I think that approving this resolution will send from the admittedly whitest community board, I think, in Manhattan. Sending this signal means a lot. And there was an social media, there has been some questioning of our relevance, which some of you may have seen the article that I sent around. And I just think that you should think about that. You do not, I do not want them to put out a headline that says CB8 votes against reforming the police department. I don't think that's the headline you want to read. So thank you. I hope everybody votes for this.
Thank you. Craig?
I have nothing to add except call the question.
Okay.
Is there a second?
I saw more, there's some more hands raised. I don't know. Do we
I
address
second.
them?
It's, I mean, it's sort of up to you guys. I would say basically you don't really, procedurally, technically,
Okay.
no, you know, we've sort of made exceptions in the past, but basically,
Okay.
to call the question, then you just go. Call it.
Okay. We call the question and on the resolution. We have,
Yeah, I can tally the vote on this one. So please raise your hand if you are voting no, abstaining, or not voting for cause. And I'll take them one by one. We'll start with Elaine Walsh.
Abstain.
Thank you. Jane Partial.
No.
Thank you. Ed Hartzog.
Abstain. I like the idea. I just have to abstain. Just I'm over lawyering, but yeah, I'm just going to abstain. That's all.
A little over lawyering never hurt anybody. Gail Barron.
Gail, unmute yourself.
Sorry. Abstain.
You. Felice Farber.
Abstain.
Thank you. Michelle Birnbaum.
No.
Thank you. Marco Tamayo.
Abstain. I'm going to be in agreement with A. Thank you.
Thank you, Marco. And then Elizabeth Ashby.
Elizabeth, unmute.
I just put my hand up to second calling the question, and I can't get it down.
Okay, I'll fix that.
We'll mark you as a yes. Thank you, Elizabeth. Any other hands? Sorry, Rebecca, what was that?
While we're tallying those votes, the Parks and Waterfront resolution passed 39-0 to 1 abstention.
I'll have the tally in just a moment.
Okay, in the meantime, I think we can move the agenda if you guys are.
can I close with a statement if that's okay?
Sure.
Okay. So basically, we derive our opinions by our lived experiences, as well as some who have lived privileged lives. Black families actually have to have something called the talk, how to react when being stopped by police. I have 2 sons, and I've had that talk more than once, and I still communicate with both of my sons often on how to react, what to do, and they're adults when they're stopped by the police. And we see that even when you react in a way of not resisting, you can still end up being murdered by the police. Thank you.
And if, Sandra, if I could add one last statement. First, thank you to the community board members who voted in support of this resolution. We came to it with the full agreement of the large number of folks who participated from the public, as well as our community board members. And I just wanted to note that our first whereas says that there's a crisis of confidence in policing in New York City, and we wish to support officers doing good work and hold those officers committing misconduct or harming the community accountable. And for those of you who didn't attend the meeting, I encourage you to watch the video. You know, I have the privilege of working with Sandrea. She brings her whole self to this work, and it must be incredibly difficult. She talked a lot at the meeting about her experience and the work that she's done, and she is truly an expert in multiple ways, both in her professional life as well as in her lived experience. So I am privileged to work with her, and so I just wanted to thank her for continuing to lead this committee and to do this amazing work. So.
Thank you. I appreciate you, and all of that I can echo and push back to you. Thank you. You're phenomenal to work with, really. You are. And thank you for everyone that voted either way. Your voice is heard.
All right, thank you both. Go
Russell,
ahead.
you want me to read the total?
Yeah.
Okay, the resolution passes with 33 in favor, 2 noes, and 5 abstentions.
Okay. All right. Thank you very much, Sandrea and Sarah. So that's it for the committee reports. So I think unless anybody has any other items they want to raise, we can adjourn. Motion would be in order. Alita's moving to adjourn. Russell is seconding. Anybody opposed?
Wait, Russell, before we go, can you find out as much as you could about timeframes for the city comprehensive plan comments so that we don't fall behind in terms of the schedule? And then I'll make a motion to adjourn.
Sure.
Thank
The
you.
answer to your question is yes. Yeah, I will.
Okay. Motion to adjourn.
Okay. I second. Anyone opposed or any concerns? Great, everybody. Okay, well, thank you very much. Great meeting, everybody. And we will see you at the next one.
Thanks. Good
Carolina
night.
Tejo, did you need to say anything? You have your hand up.
Nope, I was just going to second the motion to adjourn.
Fantastic. Thank you.
Thanks.
Everyone have a wonderful night.
Good night.